what I want to do is to use the information that we've got, and I want to put it together in a pattern. Now, a couple of weeks ago, there was a Sabbath school lesson, and it was talking about the origin of evil, and I wasn't too happy with sort of where I had gotten to by the end of that lesson. And it asked the question about whether God was responsible for creating evil. And I said to myself, what a ridiculous question. But then I realised that the answer wasn't quite as obvious as I thought it might have been. So I'm going to share with you just a few thoughts, a few reflections, almost, if you like an armchair chat, about how some of the pieces fit together. So it'll be a bit of a rough ride to start with, so fasten seatbelts. It does get better, it does get lighter as you go away, so don't get too terrified by the first few challenges to think. It does get better, and when we've finished, I'm hoping that we'll have a bit better understanding, particularly about how things fit together. So it's not so much about information today, it's more about connecting information. Now, just so that you don't feel left out, and just to get the brain working a little bit, I'd like you in your minds, or if you've got a pen in front of you, you might want to do it physically, or you might want to just do it on a book or something. I'd like you to create a circle. All right, that didn't take long, did it? Now, does your circle have a centre? All right. How about we draw a circle now without a centre? No? Okay. Let's move on to the next bit then. I would like you to create two circles where they have a different ratio of the circumference to the diameter. You don't like that idea, Kyle? You don't think that's possible? Nor do I. Okay. Did God create the ratio of the circumference to the diameter of a circle? Would that ratio exist if it hadn't been created? All right? Just think about it a little bit. For the concept of a circle to exist, all right, did it have to be created? All right, we'll admit that God was the first one to conceive of a circle, and God knew that it would have a centre, and God knew that there would be this ratio. Now, just in case didn't do it. Okay, that was a man, Descartes, who had a lot to do with one of the early people who wanted to calculate that thing. That is pi to about 2,700 places. There is no pattern in it, no nothing. But does it need to be created? Would that ratio still exist if there was no God? Actually, Descartes, he got involved in, I understand, in a debate about whether God existed, and he produced a great mathematical equation, and it ended up equals pi, therefore there is a God. The other guy had no idea what he was talking about, so Descartes won the debate, but I'm not too sure that he deserved to. All right, getting on to it. Basics. God created all matter. I don't think there's a problem with that. God created matter. God created life. I don't have a problem with that. Can a theoretical possibility exist without being created? Ooh. At one stage I possibly would have said no. But at this stage I think that a theoretical possibility can exist without being created. And I think you can see where I'm going. Did God create every conceivable theoretical possibility? Obviously not, because he later created this earth, didn't he? All right? So God didn't create every theoretical possibility. All right, let's have a look at evil. First of all, we ought to define it. And I've defined it as anything that would interfere with the perfect operation of God's perfect universe. Now, I'm just waiting for somebody to shout at me, hey, it's the transgression of the law. And I'm not going to argue with you. Because what is God's law? God's law is a set of instructions telling us what to do and what not to do to interfere with his perfect universe, isn't it? So we're starting to put a few things together, aren't we? All right, let's have a look a little bit further. In the very beginning, evil existed only as a theoretical possibility. All right? There was no such thing as evil. God created a good universe, no sorrow, no pain, no suffering, no evil. To do so, if you're going to create something perfect, you have to know what to avoid, don't you? If you are going to build a house and you want a perfect house, and who doesn't, then you've got to know what to include and what to exclude. And if God didn't have an understanding of evil, he wouldn't have been able to do that, would he? So he must have had an understanding of evil. Therefore, all right, God had to have a knowledge of good and evil. So, okay, let's think about when evil becomes a problem then. All right, when evil exists only as a concept, can it do you any harm? Not really. Not going to affect you, is it? If you are totally isolated from it and its effects. I keep thinking back to this wonderful, this terrible thing actually of COVID. And I'm thinking of some of the remote islands. I think Vanuatu spent a long time not affected by it. It was isolated from it, but unfortunately it did suffer from some of the effects, because Vanuatu relied on tourism, and because of COVID, they didn't get their tourists, so it had quite a problem. So evil can affect us if we consider engaging with it, if we have to take restrictive steps to avoid its consequences, or we can be affected by the evil, if you like, things that others do. I usually follow the news, and just about every day there is something about somebody who has been affected by the actions of some driver who has been intoxicated or under the influence of drugs or whatever, or even maliciously. So we can be affected by by evil perpetrated by others. Evil is not a problem if we are completely isolated from it and its effects. Evil existed only as a concept back before this world was created, and it didn't affect anybody. Now, another thing that's worth noting is that God understands evil, but he finds it repulsive Evil cannot survive in his presence. Unfortunately, we're attracted to it, and it is an almost irresistible attraction. God alone has the ability to know evil but isolate himself from it and its effects. God is special in that way. We do not have that ability. Now, there's a bit of a conundrum there that we'll deal with in just a minute. How did evil become a reality? All right, Isaiah chapter 14 and verses, what have we got, 12. So let's have a look at some of these things. We'll pick out a few of these things. I won't read it word for word. It is talking about Lucifer in verse 12, and it refers to him as the son of the morning. And it's saying how he's been cut down to the ground. And in verse 13, it gives us the reason. You have said in your heart, I will ascend unto heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest side of the north. Verse 14, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. And in verse 15, yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, or the grave, to the lowest depths of the pit. So, how did evil become a reality? It became a reality when somebody changed it from being just a theoretical concept into an action. It started in the mind, but it ended up in actions. Now, I have read a suggestion that what happened was that God the Father and Jesus got together to plan this earth. Lucifer was left out, and he felt that he should have been consulted. He wanted to have his say, and things sort of grew from there. Now, we should note in this that, all right, we've got a God, we've got a universe that can be messed up by evil. Now, you'd think he'd take a few precautions, wouldn't you? All right, God values relationships. God wants us to choose to serve him. He didn't want robots, so he gave us choice. We'll illustrate that in just a minute. This involved risk. God taking risks. God takes responsible risks. Where the outcome justifies the risk, God takes a risk. He chose to take the risk. Now, I told you about my grandson. When he came, all right, when he visits us, which is not often, we try to give him as many experiences as we can. And every chance he got on the green machine, and he loved it. And he even managed to roll it. Now, I think that would take skill. I've never managed to roll a green machine. They've got a very low centre of gravity. He loved the green machine. Whoops, what happened? Oh, sorry. All right. Okay. Actually, we will go to that next one. I did think of getting a remote control car for him. But do you know what he really was taken with? He was taken with the dog. And he and his brother, they competed for the affections of this dog. So when we went for a walk, when we got near home, I'd give the kids a treat to take home. They would call the dog would run to them, they would get the dog to sit, to shake hands, to do just about everything under the sun, and then they'd give the dog the treat, and everything was good. What did the dog have over the green machine and over a remote-controlled vehicle? Yes, that too. What I would put to you is that the big difference is that the dog chose whether it responded. And they got satisfaction out of seeing the dog choose to follow their instructions and to show affection to them. I started to feel a bit left out because they sort of took over my role for a little while, and that's not allowed, is it? But yes, they developed quite a good relationship because the dog had a choice. Now, when we got up to the farm, the dog started chasing the chooks, and I didn't appreciate the choice that the dog had and tended to restrict that choice somewhat. Even though the dog desperately wanted to and actually got one by the wing on one occasion. But that's beside the point. The point I wanted to make was that if somebody is choosing to show affection, then it is far more powerful than just the control that you get from pressing buttons, isn't it? Okay. So God wanted us to serve him through love. All right. Now, I'm not going to try and explain the emergence of evil. I have been told that to do so is to excuse it. If we could explain it, it could be excused. So I'm certainly not going to overdo it, but I'm going to make a few observations. One thing is that there was a lot of time involved, and actually the theory of evolution is based on this, let's not take it too far. But when you've got plenty of time, improbable things can happen. It was highly improbable that sin would enter a perfect world, but it did, and time doesn't totally explain it, but it's a step along the way. Lucifer had beauty, intelligence, status, authority and power. Anything wrong with that? I missed the second bit. Provided it stays under control, I don't believe this is a problem. With the power, as long as their power doesn't infringe on me, I'm probably happy. All right, Lucifer had all of those things, but he noticed that Jesus had more. Yes, jealousy is the word that was used. Okay, Lucifer wanted more. So Lucifer was seduced by the desire for too much of a good thing. All right? He chose to rebel against God and his governance. In other words, he was prepared to go to unreasonable lengths to achieve it, and he got it wrong. The eventual consequence of evil is death. So Lucifer was cast out of heaven. It meant he had limited access. It meant he was partially isolated from heaven, and they were partially isolated from the effects of evil for that time. All right, let's keep going. Lucifer was now contaminated by evil. Unfortunately, we can't engage in evil and then just pull back. It is intoxicating, it is addictive, and only divine intervention could have saved him, and he wasn't prepared to take the terms. So he was gone. There are some problematic safeguards. God's response would have implication for others around him. Remember, we said that God valued choice. Now, if he immediately destroyed Lucifer, then would we choose to serve him, or would we serve him through fear? That was a risk he wasn't prepared to take, so he decided that it was best to let things play out. So he let it play out so that the onlookers could make, and this is a very important concept, an informed choice. This was what God wanted. Eventually the sinner must be isolated. Death is the ultimate isolation. The penalty could only be paid, and this is the way God set it up, could only be paid by one equal with God. So he wanted a system that if somebody sinned, paid the penalty, sin again, pay the penalty, sin again, what have you got? You've got eternal evil, haven't you? God was not prepared to that, so he set the penalty for sin as death, or for evil as death, and only one equal with God could pay that penalty. And I have referenced there Philippians, if I can just find it here, because I find it too difficult to look these things up as I go along, and it looks like I've missed that one. It talks about Jesus being equal with God, and he was the one who paid the penalty. Okay, so sin will ultimately be isolated. So, spreading evil. We'll move over this fairly quickly. Lucifer wasn't happy to keep evil to himself. He'd been, well, it has been conjectured anyway that he was jealous about the creation of this world, and if you look there, you'll find, you all know the story, so I won't go over it. But he tempted Eve, and Eve succumbed, Adam succumbed, and there were consequences. And in verse 7, Genesis chapter 3, the eyes of them both were opened. They saw that they were naked. Now, some will claim that that's the natural state, but if you go biblically, it's not a natural state. They hid themselves from the presence of God. Shame, in other words. First time they'd done it. Afraid. That's in verse... No, I can't read it. Okay. The bit in bold there, the first blame game. First time blame had been attributed on this earth as a result of sin. You notice Adam blames Eve, Eve blames the serpent, and then right at the last there are consequences for them. Bruising's not a pleasant experience. And further on, and we may come back to this, it's talking about conception and giving birth, and also desire to the husband, cursed is the ground, etc. And eventually, dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. God had originally given them the tree of life, but they were to be denied access to it. As you'll find there in verse, was it about 22? Okay, they were denied access to the tree of life because evil was not to be able to happen, go on eternally, and that was it. Now, there's a bit of a problem here. Knowledge of good and evil. After Satan fell, did the angels know about it? Did they have to pay the penalty? Okay. So Adam and Eve were told that it was evil to eat of the fruit. So evil, they must have known a certain amount about it, mustn't they? All right? But it didn't affect them. Angels witnessed Lucifer's rebellion, but it didn't affect them. They knew something about evil, but they did not experience evil. No problem. Satan engaged in evil. Adam and Eve engaged in evil. They gained first-hand experience in evil. Big problems. Now, it mentioned there earlier childbirth. I clearly have never experienced childbirth. I will never know what it's like. There are others here who have experienced it, and if I were to start to expound on childbirth, they would just laugh at me and say, no, you haven't experienced it. And rightly so. For evil to be a problem, it appears that it needed to be experienced. A surface knowledge of evil was not enough to do it, but first-hand experience, that was it. For created beings, a knowledge of evil is achieved by engaging with evil. God gained this knowledge some other way. How he did it, I'll leave that to him. Okay, the plan of salvation was activated, and this is sort of where I really wanted to get to. There was a promise was alluded to in Genesis 3:15. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. So a promise that, yes, we would be injured, but the devil would receive a fatal blow. The penalty was paid. Galatians chapter 4, and I hope I wrote that one down. Here we go. But when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons and daughters, obviously. So the penalty was paid. 1 Thessalonians, the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, the voice of the archangel, etc. The dead in Christ shall rise first. Then we which are alive and remain will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so shall we ever be with the Lord. So this, because of the plan of salvation, means that the effects of evil can be removed. So in Revelation 21 and verses 2 to 4, and that one might be worth looking up actually, so that's Revelation 21 and verses 2 to 4, and I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men. He will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. And God himself shall be with them and be their God. And this is, I quite like this. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. In other words, evil has been dealt with. Just an observation here. Before the advent of evil, all of God's actions were easy to explain. But after the introduction of evil, that reference there in Isaiah 28, it talks about he shall be wroth as in the valley of Gibeon, that he may do his work, his strange work, and bring to pass his act, his strange act. In other words, to deal with evil, God had to do some things that he would not have otherwise done. There are some things that we find hard to explain, and it is a result of evil. God has been forced into certain circumstances. John 15:5, he's talking about the vine and the branches, and he's saying, without me you can do nothing. In other words, in our own strength, we are addicts. We can't detox without help. We need divine help because basically we can't help it. We're addicted to evil. Now, how do we deal with it? We should love the good and hate the evil. We need to isolate ourselves from it as much as practicable. I used to enjoy when I was very much younger reading about crime and some of those things, and my mum would say to me, you don't want to be filling yourself with that sort of stuff. You should be filling yourself with good. You should not be concentrating on evil. We're to love the good and hate the evil. And the reference is there. And in Jude, the 24th verse, sorry, what was it? 24th verse, I've got the wrong one. Or have I lost it? Okay. It's about, anyway, keeping us from falling. Jesus also used the illustration. He said, in no wise will he allow people to that if we stay in his hand, that we will not be cast out. All right. Now, summary. God did not create evil. Initially, evil was just a theoretical concept. A theoretical concept does not need to be created to have an existence. You don't need a God to have a theoretical possibility. It can exist without a God. Oops. God loved us enough to give us freedom of choice despite the risk. How much? Just think about it. He was prepared to risk all so that we could have a higher quality of life. A bit of a concept, isn't it? God entered this world. Sorry, what have I got? Evil entered this world, sorry. Romans 5:12, I found that one. Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, so for that all have sinned. So sin came. But Jesus paid the penalty. Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. God can let us into heaven. All right, think about this one. What is the criterion for getting into heaven? God wants us in heaven. And he can only have us there if we do not pose the threat for the reintroduction of evil. The text in Nahum says sin will not arise the second time. If we pose a risk of that happening, he can't have us there. But if we don't pose a risk, he wants us there. God made provision for us to fulfil that criterion. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish but have everlasting life. For God sent not his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. So God has made provision for dealing with evil, not only as a general thing, but for me and for you. It's our choice. What is that going to be?